Yes, you really can plot your novel using a moral code, and I'm going to show you how in these 8 steps. Hi, I'm John Matthew Fox of BookFox. I'm an editor who helps authors write better books through coaching and through courses. So for this video, I'm drawing inspiration from 2 sources. One would be John Gardner's on moral fiction, and he argues that true art is by its very nature moral. And then the other source is John Truby, The Anatomy of Story. And he has a whole section in that book that talks about how morality can influence your plot. But ultimately, I read and thought about this for a long time, and then I created this structure to help you use morality to craft your book. Let's get started with number 1. Show the central moral issue of your story. So it's a great idea to start your book, and I'm talking about like the very first scene, with introducing the central moral problem of your story. Look at the first scene in The Social Network, where it's basically asking, are people more important than ambition or success? And for Mark Zuckerberg, the movie makes clear he answers that very badly. In fact, he says, I don't want any friends. Now, a little warning here, you don't want to resolve that central issue in the first scene. You just want to raise it, like create this moral problem. That whets the reader's appetite because they anticipate that this problem is going to be explored throughout the whole story. Or look at Barbara Kingsolver's book, Demon Copperhead. The very first scene of that book shows a woman so drugged out she has lost consciousness, but while she is unconscious, she gives birth to a baby. So right away, this book is showing you the horrible moral consequences of addiction. And a great lesson that writers can take from this is you want to start with behavior, not with explanation. You don't have your character just sitting around talking about moral things. You dramatize it by showing them in action struggling with a moral concept. So that's the beginning framework of your story. Now let's talk about the next thing you should do in your book, and it is number 2, start challenging your protagonist's values and morals. So you guys are probably familiar with the term inciting incident, and I think this step is pretty similar to that. But instead of just thinking about how to get action in your story right from the beginning or how to get conflict, I'm encouraging you to think about it directly in light of your protagonist's morality and how their morality is being challenged in some way. Let's look at V.E. Schwab's The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. Listen, Addie is a good girl, but she is threatened with an arranged marriage. Obviously, she wants to avoid this at all costs. So what does she do? She makes a deal with the devil. Use this scene to contrast what the character believes with what they actually do under pressure. If you'd asked Addie before this whole arranged marriage thing, oh, do you want to make a deal with the devil? She would have said, no thank you. But a lot of protagonists think they know their moral code until they come up against something that challenges it, and then they change in some way. Another example would be The Road by Cormac McCarthy. Anytime they meet another survivor, they have to be wary like, oh, is this guy a cannibal who wants to kill us and eat us? So on one hand, they want to be the good guys who help strangers, but then on the other hand, that kind of traditional morality ends up getting you killed in this post-apocalyptic wasteland. Now, for your book, I would recommend making the morally questionable choice the only way forward for your protagonist. It invites all sorts of delicious possibilities. If you need more help with your novel, I have 2 ways to help you. One would be Bookfox Academy, which is 10 self-guided courses. It'll take you through the entire process of writing your novel. And then the second choice would be my mentorship program, which is Bookfox Lab, where you get weekly feedback on your work, where you meet with mentors regularly, where you get weekly craft lessons, and you also build a community of writers. So now we're getting into the middle of the beginning of your book. And for this stage of your story, I would recommend stage number 3, which is show your protagonist moving from moral weakness to moral strength. Look, your character has some sort of flaw, right? I mean, because you don't want them to be a Mary Sue or a Gary Stu. So I'm recommending that you don't just make it a generic flaw, but you consider giving them a kind of moral weakness. And then what you're going to do is show that over the course of the story, the protagonist is going to work on overcoming that moral flaw. So let's look at a classic film for this one, Casablanca, specifically the character of Rick. So who is Rick at the beginning of the story? He's self-centered. He's cynical. He doesn't stick his neck out for nobody. He is very apolitical. However, over the course of the entire story, what we see is he changes into a different type of person who is willing to sacrifice himself for the greater good. What does he do? He fights the Nazis and he joins the Free French forces. For another example, let's look at Schindler's Ark, written by Thomas Keneally, and this was the book that gave rise to Schindler's List. So Oskar Schindler was initially kind of a sleazeball. I mean, really, he was trying to profit blood off the cheap labor of Jews. But over the course of the story, we see him overcome that sort of moral shortcoming, and what he ends up doing is he ends up trying to save as many Jews as possible from the Holocaust. So what I'd recommend for your book is that you establish that moral weakness over, say, the first third of your story, and then slowly start to show them transitioning into a kind of moral strength or overcoming that weakness throughout the rest of the novel. But one warning I have about this is that you don't want to skip the cost. Moral strength isn't free. Rick lost his love and his safety, and Schindler lost all of his wealth and died broke. This moral decision has to cost your character an enormous amount. Okay, so now we're definitely in the middle of your story, and I think a good step for this stage of the story is number 4, create a moral dilemma. Moral dilemmas are absolutely fantastic because it forces your hero to choose between two options, neither of which seem very good to them. It's an impossible choice, a choice they shouldn't have to make, but forcing them to make that choice evolves them as a character and really shows the moral fabric of your story. One of my favorite moral dilemmas is in the novel Silence by Shusaku Endo, and it's basically a priest in 17th century Japan, and the authorities demand that he profane a holy relic, or else they will continue to torture his parishioners. So if you want to include a moral dilemma in your book, I have 3 important points for you. The first one is you really have to make both choices seem like legitimate options. It can't be like one's bad and the other one's like, obviously they're going to do this one. I mean, for a priest, it's a horrible thing to have to profane a holy relic. But on the other hand, obviously, God doesn't want these people to be tortured either. The second piece of advice is you want to root it in the character. So in the graphic novel Watchmen by Alan Moore, Ozymandias has to choose between several million people dying or several billion people dying in a nuclear holocaust. Now, this is a perfect moral dilemma for a character like him, who is very brainy and very cerebral, and he's just like, well, I choose the millions over the potential billions. Just remember that what creates agony in one character might be a really easy choice for a different type of character. And then the third piece of advice I have for you is to avoid easy outs. So Sophie's Choice by William Styron features a mother who is forced to choose which one of her children will die, and if she doesn't choose which one will die, then the Nazis will kill both of them. So what you don't want to do is find an easy way out for your character, like let her just find a third option where neither one has to die. That really lets your character off the hook. The power of a moral dilemma is forcing your character to confront that impossible choice head on. So now we're to the hind end of the middle part of your novel, and this is the exact right stage for number 5, showcase moral complexity in dialogue. So up to this point, you've probably layered in a lot of the moral complexities of your story, but this is the point where you actually want two characters to talk about it in dialogue explicitly. And really the best place for this to happen is, say, about 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through your story. If you do it earlier than that, it makes your book seem a little preachy. If you do it too late, I don't think it works well either. I feel like 2/3 to 3/4 is the prime spot to pull this off in a novel. So for this one, let's look at a classic, Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. So there's a whole conversation between Raskolnikov and Sonia where basically they are debating whether some people are above morality. Basically, did he have the right to kill his landlady? Now, Raskolnikov basically says, I have the right to transgress for a higher purpose. And Sonia very vehemently says, nope. No, you don't. You have gone over to the devil. So in your book, what you want to do is make sure that each character in the novel has a very different approach to the central moral question. In Dostoevsky, Raskolnikov has a very Nietzschean view of morals, like, I am the Übermensch, who is above any sort of morality. And Sonia has a very Christian view of morality. Now, the danger of a dialogue-heavy section like this is that you create a straw man, where you're not really accurately representing what one side would actually say. You want to give both sides the best possible arguments that they could possibly make. Okay, now we are almost to the climax, not quite, but almost there, with step number 6, which is the hero takes dubious moral steps to defeat the antagonist. So at this point, you're trying to create a little bit of a moral breakdown in your protagonist. They want to win so badly that the ends justify the means. And a great example of this would be Hopper in Stranger Things. So yeah, he's not above punching a state trooper in the face in order to get access to the morgue. He's not even above assaulting Mayor Klein and smashing his nose into a door and threatening to cut off his finger with a cigar cutter. These are definitely morally dubious acts. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. but we accept them and we accept him as a hero and still like them because we understand he's just trying to beat the antagonist. So what I see as an editor is that a lot of writers don't get their protagonists to the place where they can make mistakes, to get them to the place where they're so desperate that they make a questionable moral decision. Push your character, really push them to the edge. For a second example of this, let's look at Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins, and specifically the character of Gale. Gale develops a two-stage bomb. Basically, the bomb goes off, kills a lot of people, and then when people rush in to help, the bomb goes off again, killing all those first responders. So Gale is so desperate to win the war that he steps over a very clear ethical line and goes way too far, and in the end, this is what turns Katniss against him. So look, if your protagonist is too strong or too good, they're not going to make mistakes like this. So give them the opportunity to make mistakes. Okay, we have two more steps, and this has to do with the climax. Number 7 is about moral decisions in your climax. It is a fantastic choice to make your protagonist choose a moral option in the climax of your story. Let's look at The Mist by Stephen King. Now, I will say the book has a very different ending, but the movie ending, King actually gave his approval to. He said, "This is such a good ending, I wish I had thought of it myself." Basically, a father is trapped in a car with his son and others, and monsters are closing in, threatening to kill them. So to save them from a brutal and gruesome death, the father makes the difficult decision to kill everybody in the car. But when he steps out of the car, ready to be killed himself, guess what? The mist clears, the military has arrived, the monsters are gone, and he's saved, but he has to live with the knowledge that he killed people needlessly. Another great climactic moment is in the Dark Knight series, where Batman has to choose between saving the woman he loves, Rachel, or saving Harvey Dent, which is basically a choice to save Gotham. So we have to weigh the morality of his personal desire versus his duty. So if you're going to try this for your climax, I have 3 quick tips for you. One is that you want to strip away the luxury of time. This decision will be much harder if your protagonist doesn't have any time to research or find another option or something. They just have to act. The monsters are second away, the buildings are about to explode, and ultimately this is a ticking clock strategy. And by the way, in Bookfox Lab, my coaching program, I have an entire lesson all about how to use ticking clocks effectively. It's amazing. Consider joining us in Bookfox Lab. And it's been great to see writers use these techniques in their stories. The second point is you want to make this decision very costly. Batman loses someone that he loves very much, and the father in The Mist shoots his son for nothing. And third, you want to consider the irony. A lot of powerful climaxes often include some sort of tragic irony. All right, now we're to the very last step in thinking about your book in terms of morality, and this would obviously be number 8, the ending where the correct moral wins. So your ending is basically like a referendum on the morality of your book as a whole. So what I'm trying to get you to do is not to think only about your ending in terms of plot, although, plot's a good thing to think about at the ending, but also to think about resolving the central moral questions that your book has been talking about all along. So let's look at a book like The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by Stieg Larsson. Look, Elizabeth Salander gets revenge on her accuser, the larger conspiracy is exposed, good triumphs, the wicked are punished. Hooray! I mean, really, Dragon Tattoo is asking, even after all this time, is justice possible? And it says with a resounding yes. Yes, yes it is. Really, Dragon Tattoo is asking, is justice possible even after all this time? And it answers with a resounding yes. And I'd say that in the vast amount of stories, the story's going to end with a good guy triumphing. Basically, the good guy's going to win. However, if you are writing a different type of story, maybe a tragedy, then you would want a moral calamity to happen at the end of your story. And for an example of this, look at Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. At the end of that book, Ender realizes that what he has done is commit genocide. Unwittingly, but that's what he's done. Now, this book still ends on a positive moral note because even though he has committed a horrendous mistake, as readers, we're on his side, feeling that genocide is very, very bad. So in the end, even though everything went wrong, we definitely feel alongside him that this was a tragedy. But I will say there's one danger with this approach is that sometimes authors tack on some sort of, a little bit too preachy of a moral lesson at the end, and it doesn't seem to correspond with everything the book has done so far. Eesh. Don't do that. What you want to do is trust the story that your book has been wrestling with all along, and trust that the reader by now has gotten what you're trying to say. I hope that gave you a lot of practical ways to integrate morality into your novel and to structure your novel using morality. And make sure to click the links below if you are interested in Bookfox Academy or Bookfox Lab. I love you all. Good luck with your writing. Write on.